The conference room overlooked the glittering skyline of Los Angeles, floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the golden afternoon sun like a mirror of excess. Daniel Harlow stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, his jaw clenched so tightly that the muscle twitched beneath his surgically perfected skin. 20 pairs of eyes stared at him. Some pitied him, others judged him. A few looked away entirely, unable to witness the fall of a man who had built an empire on the promise that no flaw could survive his scalpel. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table. The video was still playing on the enormous screen behind him, the loop endless and merciless. His own voice echoed through the room, sharp and cutting, dripping with contempt. The young man in the footage, round-faced and gentle, stood frozen in the rain, clutching a soaked cardboard box against his chest. His eyes brimmed with confusion and hurt as Daniel, just 48 hours earlier, had ripped the package from his hands and shouted words that now seemed to burn in the air between them. "What are you even doing here? Who hired you? Do you even understand what this place is?" The silence in the conference room was suffocating. Daniel's attorney, Margaret Chen, sat to his right, her expression carefully neutral. Across from her, the CEO of Lumina Cosmetics, his largest contract, folded her arms and waited. She did not need to speak. Her presence said everything. Daniel opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat like shards of glass. How had it come to this? How had one moment, one cruel reaction, unraveled everything he had spent 20 years building? Then, the door opened. A young woman stepped inside, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She carried a tablet and her face was pale. She did not look at Daniel. She looked at Margaret. "It just hit 10 million views," she whispered. The room exhaled collectively, a soft rush of disbelief and resignation. Daniel felt his knees weaken. 10 million people had watched him destroy a human being with nothing but his voice and his disgust. 10 million people had seen the truth he had spent his entire life hiding, that beneath the polished surface, beneath the expensive suits and the flawless face, he was hollow. Margaret stood slowly, her hand resting briefly on his shoulder. "Daniel," she said quietly, "we need to talk about damage control, now." But Daniel could not move. He could only stare at the frozen image on the screen, at the young man whose name he had not even bothered to learn, whose only crime had been to deliver a package in the rain, the package that still sat, unopened, on his desk 3 floors below, the package that in less than an hour would change everything. But to understand how Daniel Harlow became the man in that video, the man who could look at another human being and see only inconvenience, you have to go back. You have to go back to the boy who learned very early that feelings were weaknesses and that the only thing that mattered in this world was what people could see. 2 days earlier, the morning had begun like every other morning in Daniel Harlow's carefully constructed life. The alarm on his phone chirped at 5:30 in the morning, a soft digital melody designed not to startle, but to gently coax him from sleep. He silenced it immediately, his eyes already open, his mind already calculating the day ahead. Sleep was a necessity, not an indulgence, and Daniel treated it with the same clinical efficiency he applied to everything else. He rose from the king-sized bed in his Malibu penthouse, the ocean visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the waves crashing silently against the shore in the pre-dawn darkness. The room was immaculate. No clutter, no personal photographs, no evidence that a human being actually lived here. It could have been a showroom in an architectural magazine, and in fact, it had been featured in 3. Daniel moved through his morning routine with the precision of a surgeon preparing for the operating room. 45 minutes of weight training in his home gym, the mirrors reflecting his body from every angle. At 42 years old, he maintained the physique of a man 10 years younger. Not through genetics, but through relentless discipline. Carbs were measured, protein timed, every calorie accounted for. He showered in water kept at exactly 98 degrees, applied serums and creams in a sequence he had perfected over years, each product chosen for maximum efficacy. His face, free of lines and sagging, was his own best advertisement. By 7:15, he was dressed in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, the fabric draping perfectly across his shoulders. He checked his reflection one final time, tilting his head to examine his jawline, the tightness of the skin beneath his eyes. Flawless. Always flawless. The drive to his clinic in Beverly Hills took 32 minutes in light traffic. Daniel preferred to drive himself, his hands on the wheel of his matte black Tesla, the silence broken only by the low hum of a financial podcast. He listened to the voices discuss market trends and investment strategies, but his mind was elsewhere, running through the surgeries scheduled for the day. A facelift for a television actress whose career depended on looking 35 forever. A rhinoplasty for a tech entrepreneur who believed a more refined nose would make him appear more trustworthy. A chin implant for a model who already looked like she had stepped out of a Renaissance painting. They came to him because he was the best. Because he understood that beauty was currency in Los Angeles, and he knew how to mint it. The Harlow Institute of Aesthetic Medicine occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower on Rodeo Drive, surrounded by boutiques that sold handbags worth more than most cars. The lobby was all white marble and soft lighting, with abstract sculptures that cost 6 figures and a reception desk staffed by women who looked like they had just walked off a runway. Classical music played softly through hidden speakers. Everything was designed to whisper one message: you are entering a temple of transformation. Daniel stepped out of the elevator on the top floor, and his assistant, Vanessa, was already waiting. She was 26, Stanford-educated, impeccably dressed, and utterly terrified of him. She handed him a tablet with his schedule and a coffee in a ceramic mug, the temperature exact. "Good morning, Dr. Harlow," she said, her voice bright and professional. "Your 7:45 consultation has already arrived. She is waiting in Suite 2. Daniel took the coffee without acknowledging her and walked past, scanning the schedule on the tablet. Consultations, surgeries, a conference call with a medical device company, lunch with a journalist from Vanity Fair who wanted to profile him for a feature on the future of aesthetics. His life was a series of perfectly timed intervals, each one designed to reinforce his position at the top of his field. He did not notice Vanessa's shoulders sag with relief as he disappeared into his office. Inside, the space was as carefully curated as his home. A desk made of walnut and steel, positioned to face the window so that clients would see him framed against the Los Angeles skyline. Bookshelves lined with medical journals and awards. A photograph, singular and deliberate, on the credenza. Daniel shaking hands with a former governor at a charity gala. No family photos, no reminders of the past. He set the coffee down and glanced at his reflection in the glass of a framed diploma. For a moment something flickered across his face, a tightness around his eyes, a shadow that no amount of filler could erase. He turned away quickly. The consultation with the actress went smoothly. She wanted to look younger, but not too young. Natural, but not ordinary. Daniel listened with half his attention, already visualizing the incisions, the technique, the way he would sculpt her face into something that would photograph beautifully under harsh lights. He sketched on a tablet, showing her the digital simulation of her new self, and she cried with relief. "You are a genius," she said, gripping his hand. Daniel smiled, the smile he had perfected for moments like this. Warm, but not intimate. Confident, but not arrogant. "I simply reveal what is already there," he said, the line polished from 1,000 repetitions. She left glowing, and he moved on to the next patient, and the next, each interaction smooth and transactional. By noon, he had transformed 3 faces on paper and scheduled surgeries that would generate over $200,000 in revenue. He ate lunch alone in his office, a salad with grilled chicken, no dressing, while reviewing financial reports. At 1:30, Vanessa knocked softly on his door. "Dr. Harlow, the delivery you have been expecting just arrived. The courier is downstairs." Daniel frowned. He had been waiting for this package for 3 weeks, a specialized medical sample sent from a research facility in San Diego. It was part of an experimental program he had quietly enrolled in, something he had not told anyone about, not even his attorney. The contents were sensitive, personal, and absolutely critical. "Have them bring it up immediately," he said, not looking up from his computer. Vanessa hesitated. "The courier is insisting on a signature from you directly. He says it is protocol." Daniel's jaw tightened. He hated deviations from routine. He hated interruptions. But the package was too important to delay. "Fine," he said curtly. "Send him up." He returned to his emails, already dismissing the inconvenience from his mind. Outside his window, the city stretched endlessly, a sprawl of ambition and illusion, and Daniel Harlow sat at the center of it, king of a kingdom built on the belief that perfection could be purchased. But in less than 10 minutes, that kingdom would begin to crack. The rain started suddenly, a rare downpour that sent people scrambling for cover along Rodeo Drive. Daniel heard it drumming against the window, the sound incongruous in the otherwise silent office. He glanced outside, watching the water streak down the glass, distorting the view of the street below. Vanessa's voice came through the intercom. "Dr. Harlow." "The courier is here." "Send him in," Daniel said, standing and moving toward the door. He wanted to sign for the package and return to work. He had a surgery in 90 minutes. The door opened, and Daniel looked up, expecting a polished professional in a uniform. Instead, he saw a young man, perhaps in his mid-20s, soaked from the rain, clutching a cardboard box against his chest. The man wore a bright blue jacket with the logo of a delivery company, and his hair was plastered to his forehead. He was breathing hard as though he had run up the stairs, but it was his face that made Daniel freeze. The young man had Down syndrome. His features were soft and rounded, his eyes slightly upturned, his smile tentative and hopeful as he stepped into the pristine office, dripping water onto the white carpet. "Hi," the young man said, his voice gentle and a little slurred. "I have a package for Dr. Daniel Harlow. Are you him?" Daniel stared. For a moment he could not speak. Something twisted in his chest, something old and buried, a memory he had locked away years ago. He saw his father's face, cold and disapproving, heard the voice that had shaped him. "Weakness is a choice, Daniel. Never show it. Never tolerate it." The young man held out the box, still smiling. "It says, urgent on it. I made sure to get it here really fast. The rain made it hard, but I did it." Daniel did not take the box. He looked at the water pooling on his carpet, at the muddy footprints the young man had tracked across the floor, at the way his hands trembled slightly as he held the package, and something in Daniel snapped. "What are you even doing here?" The words came out sharper than he intended, laced with contempt. "Who hired you?" The young man's smile faltered. "I work for Quick Route Delivery. This is my job." "Your job?" Daniel stepped closer, his voice rising. "Do you have any idea what this place is? This is a medical facility. This is a business that serves some of the most important people in this city. And you come in here, dripping water, leaving a mess, like you have no concept of professionalism?" The young man's face crumpled. He looked down at the box, then at the floor, seeing the water and the mud for the first time. "I am sorry," he said softly. "I did not mean to make a mess. I just wanted to deliver the package. They said it was really important." "Give me that." Daniel snatched the box from the young man's hands, his fingers gripping the wet cardboard with disgust. "And next time, send someone who knows what they are doing." The young man stood frozen, his eyes filling with tears. "I do know what I am doing," he whispered. "I am good at my job." Daniel turned away, dismissing him with a wave of his hand. "Vanessa, show him out, and call the delivery company. I want a formal complaint filed." "This is unacceptable." Vanessa appeared in the doorway, her face pale. She looked at the young man, then at Daniel, and something flickered in her expression. Disappointment, maybe even disgust. But she said nothing. She gestured for the young man to follow her, and he did, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. As the door closed behind them, Daniel set the box on his desk and exhaled, trying to steady himself. His hands were shaking, not from anger, from something deeper, something he could not name. He did not see the woman in the waiting room, a former client recovering from a procedure who had recorded the entire exchange on her phone. He did not see her fingers moving across the screen, uploading the video to Instagram with the caption, "This is the man who promises to make you beautiful. But watch how he treats someone he thinks is beneath him." Within an hour, the video had been shared 500 times. Within 2 hours, it had been picked up by a gossip blog. By evening, it was on the national news. And by the time Daniel left his office that night, his phone was exploding with messages, his email inbox overflowing with fury and condemnation. He sat in his car in the underground parking garage, staring at the screen, watching the video play over and over again. He watched himself snatch the box, heard the venom in his own voice, saw the pain in the young man's eyes. And for the first time in 20 years, Daniel Harlow felt something he had not allowed himself to feel since he was a boy: shame. The notifications would not stop. They poured in like a flood, an endless stream of anger and judgment that filled every screen Daniel touched. His phone buzzed so constantly that he finally turned off the sound, but the vibrations continued, a relentless pulse against his palm. Text messages from colleagues, emails from clients canceling appointments, mentions on social media that tagged him, dissected him, tore him apart with words he had never imagined would be directed at him. Daniel sat alone in his penthouse that night, the city lights glittering below like 1,000 indifferent eyes. He had poured himself a glass of scotch, expensive and smooth, but it sat untouched on the table beside him. He could not bring himself to drink it. He could not bring himself to do anything except stare at his phone and watch his life disintegrate in real time. The video had been viewed over 3 million times. 3 million people had witnessed his cruelty. The comments were vicious, each one a small knife slipped between his ribs. This is the guy who is supposed to make people feel beautiful. He is a monster. Imagine treating another human being like that. Over what? Some water on the floor? I hope every single one of his clients cancels. He does not deserve to practice medicine. That poor young man. You can see his heart breaking. Daniel Harlow should be ashamed. But it was the last comment that made Daniel close his eyes and press his fist against his mouth, because the truth was he was ashamed, and he had no idea what to do with the feeling. He had spent his entire life learning to suppress emotions, to view them as obstacles to success. Feelings were weaknesses. Sentimentality was a luxury for people who did not understand how the world really worked. His father had taught him that. His father, the surgeon, the man who had never hugged him, never told him he was proud, never showed him anything except the cold logic of survival. "You want to be successful, Daniel," his father had said when Daniel was 12 years old, standing in the kitchen of their sterile home in Connecticut. "Then you learn to turn it off, all of it. The guilt, the fear, the softness. You think the world cares about your feelings? It does not. The world respects results, nothing else." And Daniel had believed him. He had turned it off. He had become the man his father wanted him to be. Brilliant, driven, untouchable. But now, sitting alone in the dark, he felt the walls he had built beginning to crack, and he was terrified of what might spill out. The next morning, Daniel arrived at his clinic an hour earlier than usual. He had not slept. He had spent the night scrolling through the comments, reading every article that mentioned his name, watching the video until he could recite every word. The young man's face haunted him. The way his smile had disappeared, the way his voice had trembled when he said, "I am good at my job." Daniel had not even asked his name. The lobby was empty when he stepped out of the elevator, the usual calm of the space feeling oppressive now. He walked past the reception desk, past the sculptures and the soft music, and into his office. He locked the door behind him and stood in the center of the room, staring at his desk. The package was still there, unopened. He had forgotten about it entirely in the chaos of the previous evening. He approached it slowly, as though it might explode if he moved too quickly. The cardboard was still damp, the edges warped from the rain. The label was smudged, but legible. His name, his address. And beneath that, in small print, medical sample, handle with care, urgent delivery required. Daniel's hands shook as he tore open the box. Inside, nestled in protective foam, was a small insulated case. He lifted it carefully, his heart pounding, and opened the lid. Inside was a vial of liquid, pale and clear, marked with a series of numbers and letters that meant nothing to anyone outside the medical field. But Daniel understood them. He understood exactly what they meant. This was the sample he had been waiting for, the genetic material that could save his life. 6 months ago, Daniel had been diagnosed with a rare form of cardiomyopathy, a degenerative disease that was slowly weakening his heart. The doctors had been blunt. Without intervention, he had 5 years, maybe less. Surgery was an option, but the success rate was low and the recovery brutal. He had kept the diagnosis secret, terrified that if his clients knew he was sick, they would see him as flawed, damaged, unworthy of their trust. But then he had learned about the program, a cutting-edge trial using genetically matched stem cells to regenerate damaged tissue. The treatment was experimental, available only to a select few, and Daniel had used every connection, every dollar, every ounce of influence to get himself on the list. The sample in his hands was his lifeline, and it had been delivered by the young man he had humiliated. Daniel sank into his chair, the vial still clutched in his hand. He stared at it, his vision blurring, his chest tight. For the first time in years, he felt something close to gratitude, and it was unbearable. He set the vial down carefully and reached for his phone. He pulled up the video one more time, watching it with new eyes. The young man, the way he had held the box so carefully, even in the rain, the way he had apologized, even though he had done nothing wrong. Daniel needed to find him. He needed to make this right. But first, he had to survive the day. The conference call with Lumina Cosmetics was scheduled for 10 in the morning. Daniel had been dreading it since he woke up. Lumina was his largest contract, a partnership that brought in over $2 million a year. They paid him to be the face of their anti-aging line, to appear in advertisements and speak at industry events, to embody the promise that beauty could be engineered. He logged into the video call from his office. his face composed, his suit immaculate. On the screen, 6 executives stared back at him, their expressions carefully neutral. "Good morning, Dr. Harlow," said the CEO, a woman named Caroline Brandt, her voice cool and professional. "Thank you for making time for this call." "Of course," Daniel said, forcing a smile. "I understand there are some concerns following yesterday's events." "Concerns," Caroline repeated, her tone flat. "Dr. Harlow, we have received over 10,000 messages from customers in the past 24 hours. 10,000, and every single one of them is demanding that we end our partnership with you." Daniel's stomach turned. "I understand that the situation was unfortunate, but I want to assure you that it does not reflect who I am or the values of my practice." "Does it not?" Caroline leaned forward, her eyes sharp, because what we saw in that video was a man who treated another human being with contempt. A man who looked at someone vulnerable and decided they were not worth basic decency. "That is not unfortunate, Dr. Harlow. That is revealing." "I made a mistake," Daniel said, his voice tight. "I was under a great deal of stress, and I reacted poorly. But I am committed to making amends." "How?" Caroline asked. "How do you make amends for something like that?" Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. He had no answer. He had spent the entire night thinking about this moment, and he still had no answer. Caroline sighed. "Dr. Harlow, Lumina Cosmetics is built on the idea that beauty should make people feel empowered, confident, valued. We cannot be associated with someone who does the opposite. Effective immediately, we are terminating our contract." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. He stared at the screen, his mind scrambling for something to say, some argument that could change her mind. But Caroline was already moving on, her tone brisk and final. "Our legal team will be in touch regarding the details. We wish you the best moving forward." The screen went black. Daniel sat in silence, staring at his own reflection in the dark monitor. His perfect face, his flawless skin. It felt like a mask now, something hollow and meaningless. The rest of the day passed in a blur of bad news. 2 more clients cancelled their surgeries, citing ethical concerns. A medical journal withdrew an article he had written, saying they could not publish work by someone whose behavior contradicted the values of their publication. A speaking engagement at a national conference was quietly rescinded. By the time the sun set, Daniel Harlow, the man who had built an empire on perfection, was watching it collapse around him, and the only thing he could think about was the young man in the blue jacket standing in his office saying softly, "I am good at my job." Daniel could not eat. He tried mechanically lifting a fork to his mouth, but the food tasted like ash. He pushed the plate away and stared out the window of his penthouse, watching the lights of Los Angeles flicker and glow in the distance. Somewhere out there, the young man was living his life, unaware that Daniel had spent the last 36 hours thinking about him, consumed by guilt and something else, something sharper, desperation, because Daniel had opened the vial, had read the documentation that came with it, and he had seen the donor information. The sample had come from a registered tissue bank, part of a voluntary program where individuals donated genetic material for medical research and treatment. The donors were anonymous, identified only by a code. But the shipping label on the box, the one Daniel had torn open so carelessly, had included a packing slip with a name, Michael Reyes. The young man who had delivered the package was the same person who had saved Daniel's life without even knowing it. Daniel sat at his desk, staring at the name written on the packing slip, his mind racing. How was this possible? How could the universe be so cruel, so precise, as to connect them in this way? He had humiliated the one person whose generosity had given him a chance to survive, and now he had no idea how to fix it. He needed to find Michael Reyes. He needed to apologize. But more than that, he needed to understand who this young man was, why he had chosen to donate, why he had been working as a delivery driver in the rain when he could have been anywhere else. Daniel opened his laptop and typed the name into a search engine. The results were sparse. A few social media profiles, none of them active, a mention in a local news article from 3 years ago, something about a charity run. And then, buried on the second page of results, a link to a blog post written by a woman named Elena Reyes. Daniel clicked it. The blog was simple, personal, the kind of space where someone shared their thoughts with a small circle of friends and family. The post was titled "Why Michael Volunteers," and it was dated 2 years ago. Daniel began to read, his heart pounding. "My brother Michael has Down syndrome. He is 24 years old, and he is one of the kindest people I have ever known. People see him and make assumptions. They think he cannot do things. They think he needs to be protected, sheltered, kept safe from a world that does not always understand him. But Michael does not want to be protected. He wants to contribute. He wants to work, to be useful, to know that his life has meaning. A few months ago, Michael signed up to be a tissue donor. He read about it online, about how stem cells could help people with diseases, and he decided he wanted to help. I tried to explain that it was a big decision, that he should think about it carefully, but he just smiled at me and said, "Elena, if I can save someone, why would I not do it?" That is who Michael is. He sees the good in everyone, even when they do not see it in him. He believes that everyone deserves kindness, and he lives that belief every single day. I wish the world could see him the way I see him, not as someone with a disability, but as someone with a heart bigger than most people will ever know. Daniel stopped reading. His hands were shaking. He read the post again, and then a third time, the words sinking into him like stones into water. Michael had volunteered. He had chosen to donate his cells knowing they might save a stranger's life. And then, by some twist of fate, he had been the one to deliver that life-saving sample to the man who would treat him like he was nothing. Daniel closed the laptop and stood, pacing the length of his office. He felt like he was suffocating, like the walls were closing in. He had spent his entire life believing that value was something you earned through success, through achievement, through the accumulation of wealth and status. But Michael Reyes had more value in his smallest gesture than Daniel had in his entire career. And Daniel had thrown it back in his face. He grabbed his phone and called Vanessa. She answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. "Dr. Harlow, I need you to find someone for me," Daniel said, his voice tight. "His name is Michael Reyes. He works for Quick Route Delivery. I need an address, a phone number, anything you can find." There was a pause. "Dr. Harlow, is this about the video?" "Yes." Another pause. Longer this time. "Are you sure that is a good idea? I mean, after everything that has happened, maybe it is better to just let it go." "I cannot let it go," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "I need to find him, Vanessa, please." She sighed. "I will see what I can do." It took Vanessa less than an hour to track down an address. Michael Reyes lived in a modest apartment in East Los Angeles, a neighborhood far removed from the glass towers and luxury boutiques of Beverly Hills. Daniel drove there the next morning, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The building was old but clean, the kind of place where families lived paycheck to paycheck, but still took pride in their surroundings. Flowers grew in pots on the balconies. A child's bicycle leaned against the wall near the entrance. Daniel parked his car and sat for a moment, staring up at the building, his heart pounding. He had no idea what he was going to say. He climbed the stairs to the third floor and found the apartment number Vanessa had given him. He stood in front of the door, his hand raised to knock, and froze. What if Michael did not want to see him? What if he slammed the door in Daniel's face, and Daniel deserved every second of it? Before he could talk himself out of it, Daniel knocked. Footsteps inside, the sound of a lock turning, and then the door opened, and Daniel found himself face to face with a woman in her early 30s, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone wary. "Are you Elena Reyes?" Daniel asked. Her eyes narrowed. "Who is asking?" "My name is Daniel Harlow. I am the man who humiliated your brother 2 days ago." Elena's expression hardened. She stepped out into the hallway, pulling the door closed behind her. "You have some nerve coming here." "I know," Daniel said quickly. "I know I do, but I need to see him. I need to apologize." "Apologize?" Elena's voice was cold. "You think an apology is going to fix what you did? Do you have any idea what that video did to him? He came home crying. He would not eat dinner. He kept asking me if he was bad at his job, if he had done something wrong, and I had to sit there and tell him no, that you were the one who was wrong, but he did not believe me, because people like you have been telling him his whole life that he is not good enough." Daniel flinched. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong. But I need to tell him that, please." Elena crossed her arms. "Why? So you can feel better about yourself, so you can check the box and move on with your life?" "No," Daniel said, his voice breaking, "because he saved my life, and I did not even know it." Elena stared at him, her expression unreadable. "What are you talking about?" Daniel swallowed hard. "The package he delivered. It was a medical sample. Stem cells. They are part of an experimental treatment for a heart condition I have. Without them, I have maybe 5 years left. And your brother, he is the donor. He volunteered to help people he will never meet, and I treated him like he was worthless." Elena's eyes widened. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she shook her head. That is just like Michael. He has been volunteering for that program for 2 years. He never told me he actually donated. He just said he was glad he could help. Can I see him? Daniel asked. Please. I know I do not deserve it, but I need to try to make this right. Elena hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. Finally, she sighed. Wait here. She disappeared inside the apartment, and Daniel stood in the hallway, his heart racing. He heard voices, low and indistinct, and then the door opened again and Elena stepped aside. Michael Reyes stood in the doorway, his eyes red-rimmed, his face still carrying the hurt from 2 days ago. He looked at Daniel, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Hi, Michael said softly. You are the doctor from the fancy building. Daniel nodded, his throat tight. Yes, I am, and I came here to tell you that I am sorry. I am so sorry for the way I treated you. Michael looked down at his feet. You made me feel bad. I know, Daniel said, his voice breaking, and I had no right to do that. You were doing your job, and you were doing it well. I was the one who was wrong. Michael looked up, his eyes searching Daniel's face. Why were you so mean to me? It was such a simple question, and Daniel had no simple answer. He thought about his father, about the years of being told that weakness was unacceptable, about the walls he had built around himself to survive. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the young man standing in front of him, waiting for the truth. Because I was afraid, Daniel said quietly. I was afraid of what I saw when I looked at you. I was afraid of feeling something I did not know how to handle, and so I lashed out. But that was my failure, Michael, not yours. You did nothing wrong. Michael studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Okay, he said. Thank you for saying sorry. Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. There is something else I need to tell you. The package you delivered, it was a medical sample, and you are the one who donated it. You saved my life, Michael. And I did not even know it until yesterday. Michael's eyes widened. Really? Really? Daniel said. You volunteered to help people, and one of those people was me, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that gift. Michael smiled then, a small, tentative smile that made Daniel's chest ache. I am glad I could help, he said. That is why I did it, to help people. Elena stepped forward, her hand on her brother's shoulder. Michael, do you want Dr. Harlow to come inside? We can talk more. Michael looked at Daniel, his expression thoughtful. Then he nodded. Okay, you can come in. And Daniel, the man who had spent his life building walls, stepped across the threshold into a modest apartment that felt more like home than anywhere he had ever lived. The apartment was small, but filled with warmth. Photographs covered the walls. Snapshots of Michael and Eleanor at birthday parties, at the beach, at family gatherings where people smiled with genuine joy. A colorful blanket was draped over the worn couch. Books were stacked on a shelf beside the television, some of them children's books with bright covers, others about science and nature. In the corner, a small table held art supplies, markers, and colored pencils scattered across pages covered in drawings. Michael gestured toward the couch. You can sit down if you want. Daniel sat carefully, feeling out of place in his expensive suit, his polished shoes against the threadbare carpet. Elena remained standing, her arms crossed, watching him with an expression that was not quite hostile but far from trusting. Michael disappeared into the kitchen and returned a moment later with a glass of water, which he handed to Daniel with both hands. My sister says you should always offer people water when they visit. Thank you, Daniel said, taking the glass. His hands were shaking. Michael sat down in a chair across from him, his legs swinging slightly, not quite reaching the floor. He looked at Daniel with open curiosity, the hurt from their first encounter still visible, but tempered now by something else. A willingness to listen, to understand. So you are sick? Michael asked. With your heart? Daniel nodded. Yes. It is a disease that makes my heart weaker over time. Without treatment, it would eventually stop working. Michael's face grew serious. That sounds scary. It is, Daniel admitted. I have been very scared. I did not tell anyone because I did not want people to know I was not perfect. Nobody is perfect, Michael said matter-of-factly. My sister tells me that all the time. She says perfect is boring anyway. Eleanor smiled slightly from where she stood. I did say that. Daniel looked down at his hands. I spent my whole life trying to be perfect. I thought that if I could control everything, if I could make myself flawless, then I would be safe. But all it did was make me alone. That does sound lonely, Michael said. I do not like being alone. I like being with people, even when they are not perfect. The simplicity of the statement cut through Daniel like a knife. Here was a young man who understood something fundamental that Daniel had spent 42 years running from. Connection mattered more than perfection. Kindness mattered more than control. "Michael," Daniel said slowly, "can I ask you something? Why did you decide to donate your cells? Your sister's blog said you wanted to help people, but I do not understand why. You do not know the people you are helping. They might never thank you. They might never even know your name." Michael tilted his head, thinking. "When I was little," he said, "I got really sick. I had to have surgery on my heart. The doctors said I might not make it, but someone donated blood and that blood helped save me. My mom told me that someone I would never meet did something kind, and it gave me more time to be alive. So I thought, if someone did that for me, maybe I could do it for someone else." Daniel felt something crack open inside his chest. "You almost died?" "Yeah," Michael said, "but I did not. And now I get to do things. I have a job. I have friends. I get to draw pictures and go to movies and eat pizza on Fridays with Eleanor. So I want other people to get to do things too. That is why I donated." Eleanor's eyes were shining with tears. She looked at her brother with such fierce love that Daniel had to look away, unable to bear the intensity of it. "You are a better person than I will ever be," Daniel said quietly. Michael shook his head. "You are not bad. You were just scared and sad. My sister says when people are mean, it is usually because they are hurting inside. Are you hurting inside?" Daniel opened his mouth to deny it, to deflect the way he always did, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way Michael looked at him, without judgment, without expectation, just open, honest curiosity. Or maybe it was the fact that Daniel had nothing left to lose. His reputation was destroyed. His contracts were cancelled. The armor he had built around himself had shattered, and there was no point in pretending anymore. "Yes," Daniel said, his voice breaking, "I am hurting inside. I have been hurting for a very long time, and I did not know how to stop, so I just tried not to feel anything at all. But that did not work. It just made me into someone I am ashamed of." Michael nodded slowly. "That makes sense. My therapist says feelings are like a balloon. If you keep pushing them down, they get bigger and bigger until they pop, and then they come out all at once, and it is messy." Despite everything, Daniel almost smiled. "Your therapist is very wise." "She is nice," Michael agreed. "She has a dog named Biscuit who comes to the appointment sometimes. Do you have a dog?" "No," Daniel said. "I do not have any pets. I told myself I was too busy." "That is sad," Michael said. "Dogs are really good. They do not care if you are perfect. They just like you." Elena finally moved, sitting down on the arm of Michael's chair. "Michael," she said gently, "Dr. Harlow came here to apologize, and he did, but I think he is also trying to figure out what to do now. Is that right, Dr. Harlow?" Daniel looked up at her. "I do not know what to do. I destroyed my career. My clients do not trust me. My colleagues do not respect me. And I deserve all of it, but I do not know how to fix it. I do not know how to be different." "You start by doing one thing different," Elena said, "and then another and then another. You do not fix everything at once. You just start." "What should I start with?" Daniel asked. Michael leaned forward. "You could say sorry to everyone, not just me. All the people who saw the video, and you could tell them you are going to try to be nicer." "I do not think people will believe me," Daniel said. "They have no reason to." "Then you show them," Elena said. "Words are cheap, Dr. Harlow. If you want people to believe you have changed, you have to prove it. And that takes time. It takes showing up every day and doing the work." Daniel sat in silence for a moment, absorbing her words. Then he looked at Michael. "What if I helped other people the way you helped me? What if I used my skills to treat people who could not afford it? People who have been told they are not good enough, just like I told you." Michael's face lit up. "That would be really good. Then you could help lots of people feel better about themselves." "But not just on the outside," Daniel said, the idea taking shape as he spoke. "I spent my whole life thinking that changing people's appearance would make them happy. But that is not enough. I need to change the way I see people, the way I treat them. I need to see them the way you see them, Michael, as valuable just because they exist." Eleanor studied him carefully. "That is a nice thought, but talk is easy. How are you actually going to do this?" Daniel thought for a moment. "I have a clinic. It is expensive, exclusive, designed for wealthy people who can pay whatever I charge. But what if I opened a second location, a free clinic, in a neighborhood that needs it, where people could come and get treatment without worrying about cost, where I could work alongside other doctors who believe in the same thing. That sounds expensive, Elena said. It would be, Daniel admitted. I would have to sell my penthouse, my car, a lot of the things I thought made me successful, but none of those things have made me happy. And if Michael could save my life without knowing me, maybe I can do the same for other people. Michael smiled, the kind of smile that held no doubt, no cynicism, only hope. I think you should do it. I think it would be really cool. Daniel felt something shift inside him, a weight lifting that he had carried for so long he had forgotten it was there. He was terrified. He had no idea if this would work, if he could actually change, if people would ever forgive him, but for the first time in his life, he wanted to try. Not because it would make him look good, not because it would rebuild his reputation, but because Michael Reyes, a young man he had treated with contempt, believed he could be better, and that belief, fragile and unearned as it was, felt like the most precious gift Daniel had ever received. Over the following weeks, Daniel began to dismantle his old life piece by piece. He listed his penthouse for sale, the same apartment that had been featured in magazines, that had been a symbol of everything he had achieved. He downgraded to a modest condo in Silver Lake, a neighborhood he had always dismissed as too ordinary. He traded his Tesla for a used Honda, reliable and unremarkable. His colleagues watched with a mixture of confusion and judgment. Some thought he was having a breakdown. Others assumed it was a publicity stunt, a calculated move to rehabilitate his image. But Daniel did not care what they thought. He was not doing this for them. He met with architects and contractors, designing a new clinic from the ground up. It would be located in East Los Angeles, in a building that had once been a community center. The space was nothing like the gleaming tower on Rodeo Drive. The floors were scuffed. The walls needed paint. But it had good light, and it was accessible, and it was real. He reached out to doctors he had worked with over the years, colleagues who had expressed frustration with the commercialization of medicine, who had wanted to do more for underserved communities but lacked the resources. Some of them ignored his calls, but a few responded, cautiously interested, willing to hear him out. I cannot promise this will be easy, Daniel told them in a meeting at a coffee shop far from the polished conference rooms he was used to. I cannot even promise it will succeed, but I can promise that we will treat people with dignity, that we will see them as more than their ability to pay, and that we will do the work that actually matters. One of the doctors, a woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, who specialized in reconstructive surgery for burn victims, leaned back in her chair and studied him. Why should I trust you, Daniel? You built your entire career on vanity, on telling people they were not good enough the way they were. You should not trust me, Daniel said. Not yet, but I am asking you to give me a chance to earn it. Dr. Kim was silent for a moment. Then she nodded. Okay, I will give you 6 months. If you are serious, I will join you. But if this is just a redemption tour for your ego, I am out. That is fair, Daniel said. It was a start. He also went back to see Michael, not just once, but regularly. Every week, Daniel would drive to the modest apartment in East Los Angeles, and he and Michael would sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in the same space. Michael showed him his drawings, elaborate scenes filled with superheroes and dragons and cities made of light. He told Daniel about his job, about the routes he took, about the customers who were kind and the ones who were not. Some people do not even look at me, Michael said one afternoon, coloring in the scales on a dragon's back. They just take the package and close the door. But some people say thank you and ask me how my day is. Those people make me feel good. You deserve to feel good, Daniel said. Every single day. Michael looked up at him. Do you feel good now? Daniel considered the question. I feel better. I feel like I am moving towards something real instead of running away from something painful. That is new for me. Good, Michael said, because you seem nicer now. You smile more. Before you looked like you wanted to yell at everyone. Daniel laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised him. I probably did. I was very angry. What were you angry about? It was such a simple question, and Daniel had spent so many years avoiding it. But sitting here, in this small apartment with this young man who had shown him more grace than he deserved, Daniel finally let himself answer it honestly. I was angry at my father, he said quietly. He was a surgeon like me. He was brilliant, but he was also cold. He taught me that emotions were weaknesses, that the only thing that mattered was being the best. And I believed him. I became exactly what he wanted me to be, but it made me miserable and I did not know how to stop. Michael put down his marker. Did you tell your dad you were angry? No, Daniel said. He died 5 years ago. I never told him. That is sad, Michael said. You should have told him. Maybe he did not know you were sad. Maybe, Daniel said. Or maybe he did not care. I will never know. Michael thought about this for a moment. My dad left when I was a baby. Elena says he could not handle having a kid like me. But I do not think about him very much. I have Elena and she loves me a lot. That is what matters. Daniel looked at this young man who had every reason to be bitter, to be angry at a world that had not always been kind to him, and yet he radiated a quiet contentment that Daniel had never known. Michael had figured out something that Daniel was only beginning to understand. Love was not something you earned through perfection. It was something you gave and received simply by being human. You are teaching me how to live, Michael, Daniel said softly. I hope you know that. Michael smiled. I am just being myself, but I am glad it helps. 3 months after the video went viral, the new clinic opened. It was a small ceremony, nothing like the grand openings Daniel had once orchestrated, with champagne and celebrities and photographers. Instead, it was just a gathering of the people who would use the space, families from the neighborhood, doctors and nurses who had volunteered their time, and Michael and Elena standing near the front, Michael holding a bouquet of flowers he had picked out himself. Daniel stood at the entrance looking at the sign above the door, the Reyes Community Clinic. He had named it after Michael, a small gesture that could never repay the debt he owed, but a gesture nonetheless. When he had asked Michael's permission, the young man had cried and then hugged Daniel so tightly that Daniel thought his ribs might crack. Now, as people filed inside to tour the space, Daniel felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Dr. Kim, a slight smile on her face. You did it, she said. I did not think you would, but you did. We did it, Daniel corrected. I could not have done this alone, she nodded. So what happens now? Now we work, Daniel said. We show up every day, and we do the work that matters. Inside, Michael was showing a group of children the waiting room, pointing out the mural on the wall that he had helped paint. It was a scene of a city at sunset, buildings rising toward a sky filled with stars, and in the center, a figure with outstretched arms, welcoming everyone home. Daniel watched him, and for the first time in his life, he felt something that was not ambition or fear, or the relentless drive to prove himself. He felt peace. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, 3 months after the clinic opened. Daniel's own surgery, the procedure that would use Michael's donated cells to repair his failing heart. The doctors at the research hospital had been cautious, explaining that the treatment was still experimental, that there were risks, that success was not guaranteed. But Daniel had signed every waiver, answered every question, and prepared himself for whatever came next. The night before the surgery, he sat in his modest condo looking out at the city. He had written letters just in case, one to Dr. Kim and the team at the clinic, asking them to continue the work, one to his attorney, outlining how his remaining assets should be distributed, and one to Michael, the hardest letter he had ever written. In it, he tried to explain what the past few months had meant to him, how Michael had saved him twice, once with his cells and once with his kindness. How Daniel had spent his whole life chasing a version of success that meant nothing, and how Michael had shown him what actually mattered. He thanked him for the forgiveness he did not deserve and the friendship he had never expected. He sealed the letter and set it on the table, hoping he would never have to send it. The morning of the surgery, Eleanor and Michael arrived at the hospital before dawn. Daniel had not asked them to come, had not wanted them to feel obligated, but when he saw them in the waiting room, something in his chest loosened. You did not have to be here, he said. Yes, we did, Elena said firmly. You are Michael's friend, and friends show up. Michael handed him a small drawing folded in half. I made this for you for good luck. Daniel unfolded it carefully. It was a picture of 2 figures, one tall and one shorter, standing side by side under a sky full of stars. Above them, in Michael's careful handwriting, were the words, Friends Forever. Daniel's vision blurred. He pulled Michael into a hug, holding on tightly, trying to memorize the feeling. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. The surgical team came to take him back, and Daniel followed them down the sterile white hallways, his heart pounding. He had performed hundreds of surgeries in his career, had stood on the other side of the scalpel, confident and in control. But now, lying on the operating table, staring up at the bright lights, he felt small and vulnerable and utterly human. The anesthesiologist placed a mask over his face. Just breathe normally, Dr. Harlow. Count backwards from 10. Daniel closed his eyes. 10, 9, 8. He thought of Michael's smile, of the clinic they had built together, of the life he had been given a chance to live differently. 7, 6. He thought of his father, and for the first time he felt something other than anger. He felt pity, because his father had never known this, had never allowed himself to be vulnerable, to need someone, to love without condition. 5, 4. He thought of the man he had been, standing in his pristine office, tearing a package from Michael's hands, and he felt a deep, aching sadness for that version of himself, for all the years wasted, all the moments lost. 3. And then there was only darkness, and Daniel Harlow surrendered to it, trusting that when he woke up, if he woke up, he would be different. Not because his heart had been repaired, but because it had been broken open and remade by the kindness of a young man who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. He woke up in stages, awareness returning slowly. Pain first, a dull ache in his chest, then sound, the beeping of monitors, the murmur of voices, and then light filtering through his eyelids, too bright, too much. Daniel opened his eyes. A face hovered above him, a nurse, smiling gently. "Welcome back, Dr. Harlow. The surgery went well. You are in recovery." Daniel tried to speak, but his throat was dry, raw from the breathing tube. The nurse lifted a cup of water with a straw to his lips, and he drank gratefully. "How long?" he managed. 7 hours, the nurse said. "Dr. Patel will be in soon to talk to you about everything. But you should know the procedure was a success. The cells integrated beautifully. Your heart is already responding." Relief washed over him, so intense it brought tears to his eyes. He was alive. He had been given more time. Time to keep working, to keep learning, to keep trying to be the man Michael believed he could be. "There are people here to see you," the nurse said. "They have been waiting all day. Should I send them in?" Daniel nodded, and a moment later, the door opened. Elena entered first, her expression a mixture of relief and exhaustion, and behind her, Michael, his face breaking into a wide smile the moment he saw Daniel awake. "You are okay," Michael said, rushing to the bedside. "I was worried, but Elena said you were strong and you would be fine." "I am okay," Daniel said, his voice hoarse. "Thanks to you." Michael shook his head. "The doctors did the surgery. I just gave some cells. That is easy." "It was not easy," Elena said softly. "It was generous and brave, and it saved his life." Michael looked down, embarrassed by the praise, and then he reached into his pocket. "I brought you something else. Another drawing. This one is of you as a superhero, because you are going to help a lot of people at the clinic." He unfolded the paper, showing Daniel a figure in a white coat, standing in front of a building with light streaming from the windows. Around the figure were dozens of smaller figures, people of all shapes and sizes, all smiling. Daniel stared at the drawing, his chest tight. "I do not know if I am a hero, Michael." "You are trying to be," Michael said. "That is what heroes do. They try." And in that moment, lying in a hospital bed, his body aching and fragile, Daniel Harlow understood something he had never understood before. Heroism was not about perfection. It was not about never making mistakes. It was about getting up after you fell, about choosing kindness even when it was hard, about letting yourself be changed by the people you met along the way. "Thank you," Daniel whispered, "for not giving up on me." Michael smiled. "I do not give up on people. That is not what friends do." The recovery was slow. Daniel spent 2 weeks in the hospital, monitored constantly as his body adjusted to the new cells, as his heart learned to beat stronger. During that time, Michael visited almost every day, bringing drawings and stories, and a relentless optimism that made even the most difficult days bearable. When Daniel was finally discharged, he returned not to a penthouse overlooking the ocean, but to his small condo in Silver Lake. Elena insisted on staying with him for the first week, making sure he took his medications, making sure he rested, making sure he did not try to do too much too soon. "You doctors are the worst patients," she said, watching him try to check his emails on his phone. "You think you know better than everyone else." "I am not that bad," Daniel protested. "You tried to go for a run yesterday," Elena said flatly, 12 days after heart surgery. It was a slow run. It was idiotic. But she was smiling as she said it, and Daniel found himself smiling back. Michael, meanwhile, had taken it upon himself to educate Daniel on what he called the important things in life. He made Daniel watch animated movies, explaining the plot points with great seriousness. He taught him how to play video games, laughing when Daniel's character kept falling off cliffs. He showed him how to make paper airplanes that actually flew, and they spent an entire afternoon launching them off the balcony, seeing whose could go the farthest. You never did this stuff when you were a kid, did you? Michael asked one day, as they sat on the floor surrounded by origami cranes that Michael was trying to teach Daniel to fold. No, Daniel admitted. My father thought play was a waste of time. He wanted me to study, to practice, to prepare for the future. That is sad, Michael said. Playing is important. It makes you happy. I am learning that, Daniel said, looking at the lopsided crane in his hands. It was nowhere near as neat as Michael's, but he had made it himself, and there was something satisfying about that. As the weeks passed, Daniel grew stronger. His heart, bolstered by Michael's cells, beat with a rhythm that felt new, steady and sure. He returned to work at the clinic slowly at first, just a few hours a day, but it was enough. It was more than enough. The clinic had grown in his absence. Word had spread through the neighborhood about the place where people could get treatment without fear of bankruptcy, where they would be seen not as clients, but as human beings. The waiting room was always full. Families with children who needed cleft palate repairs, adults who had lived with disfiguring scars for years, unable to afford surgery, people who had been told by other doctors that their cases were too complicated, too risky, not profitable enough. Daniel saw them all. He listened to their stories. He learned their names, and he performed surgeries not to make them beautiful by some arbitrary standard, but to give them relief from pain, to restore function, to help them feel comfortable in their own skin. One afternoon, a woman named Rosa came in with her daughter, a 7-year-old girl named Isabella, who had been born with a port wine-stained birthmark that covered half her face. Rosa was in tears before she even sat down. I cannot afford to pay you, she said. But my daughter, she is being bullied at school. The other children call her names. She does not want to go anymore. I just want her to feel normal. Daniel knelt down, so he was at eye level with Isabella. She looked at him with wide, solemn eyes, her small hand gripping her mother's tightly. Do you know what I think? Daniel said gently. I think you are already normal. There is nothing wrong with you. But if the birthmark makes you uncomfortable, if it makes you sad, then we can talk about ways to help. Not because you need to be fixed, but because everyone deserves to feel comfortable in their own body. Isabella nodded slowly. It does make me sad sometimes, because people stare. Then we will help, Daniel said. And I promise, we will do it together, and you can ask me anything you want, anytime you want. Okay? Okay, Isabella whispered. After they left, Dr. Kim found Daniel in his office, staring out the window at the street below. You have changed, she said. Not just the words you say, but the way you see people. It is real. I had a very good teacher, Daniel said. Michael, Daniel nodded. He showed me that value is not something you earn. It is something you have just by existing. I wish I had learned that 30 years ago. You are learning it now, Dr. Kim said. That is what matters. 6 months after the surgery, the clinic held a community celebration. It was part open house, part fundraiser, part thank you to everyone who had supported the project. The street was closed off, filled with food trucks and music and laughter. Children ran through the crowd, their faces painted, their hands sticky with cotton candy. Adults gathered in clusters, talking and eating and enjoying the rare feeling of safety and community. Daniel stood near the entrance, watching it all unfold, still slightly amazed that this was real, that he had built something that mattered, not because it made him wealthy or famous, but because it helped people who needed help. A reporter from a local news station approached him, a young man with a microphone and a cameraman in tow. Dr. Harlow, can we ask you a few questions? Daniel hesitated. He had avoided the media for months, still raw from the exposure, still uncertain how to talk about what had happened, but he nodded. Sure. The reporter's questions were gentle, focused on the clinic, on the work being done. But then he asked the question Daniel had been dreading. 6 months ago, a video went viral showing you in a very different light. You were accused of treating a delivery worker with Down syndrome cruelly. How do you respond to that now? Daniel took a breath. He could deflect. He could give a polished, rehearsed answer. But he had promised himself he would be honest no matter how uncomfortable it was. The video showed exactly what happened, Daniel said. I treated another human being with contempt because I was scared and angry and too proud to admit I was struggling. What I did was wrong, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. But that young man, Michael Reyes, showed me grace I did not deserve. He forgave me, and more than that, he taught me how to live differently. This clinic exists because of him. Everything good I do from now on exists because he believed I could be better. The reporter looked surprised by the candor. Do you feel like you have redeemed yourself? No, Daniel said. Redemption is not a destination. It is a process. It is showing up every day and doing the work and trying to be a little better than you were the day before. I will be working on it for the rest of my life. The interview ended, and Daniel turned to find Michael standing a few feet away, holding 2 cups of lemonade. He handed one to Daniel. That was a good answer, Michael said. You told the truth. I learned that from you, Daniel said. They stood together watching the celebration, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Michael turned to Daniel, his expression thoughtful. Dr. Harlow, can I ask you something? Of course. And Michael, you can call me Daniel. We are friends, remember? Michael smiled. Okay, Daniel, I was wondering, do you think your dad would be proud of you now? It was a question Daniel had asked himself 100 times in the quiet moments, and he still was not sure of the answer. His father had valued success, achievement, recognition. The clinic was none of those things, at least not in the way his father would have measured them. But maybe that was the point. I do not know, Daniel said honestly, but I am proud of myself and I think that is more important. Michael nodded. I think so too. My therapist says you cannot live your life trying to make other people happy. You have to make yourself happy. And if you are doing good things, that is enough. Your therapist is very wise, Daniel said, echoing the words he had said months ago in Michael's apartment. I know, Michael said, grinning. She is the best. As the sun began to set, casting the street in shades of gold and amber, Daniel looked around at the faces of the people who had come. Some of them were patients, some were volunteers, some were just neighbors who had heard about the clinic and wanted to see what it was about. And in that moment, Daniel realized something profound. He had spent his entire life trying to create perfection, perfect faces, perfect bodies, perfect lives. But perfection was an illusion, a goal that moved further away the closer you got to it. What mattered was connection, compassion, the willingness to show up, flawed and uncertain, and do the best you could. Michael had known that all along, and now, finally, Daniel was beginning to understand it too. 1 year after the video went viral, Daniel stood in front of a classroom at a medical school in downtown Los Angeles. He had been invited to speak to a group of students about ethics in medicine, about the responsibility that came with the power to change people's lives. It was not a topic he would have been asked to speak about a year ago. Back then, he had been known for his skill, not his morality. But things had changed. Daniel looked out at the sea of young faces, some eager, some skeptical, all of them waiting to hear what he had to say. He thought about the speech he had prepared, the careful words about patient care and professional standards, and then he set his notes aside. I want to tell you a story, he began, about a man who thought he had everything figured out. He was successful, wealthy, respected. He had built a career on the promise that he could make people perfect, and he believed, truly believed, that perfection was the answer to all of life's problems. If you could just look good enough, be successful enough, control enough, then you would be happy. Then you would be safe. But that man was wrong, and it took humiliating another human being, someone who had done nothing but try to help, for him to realize it. That man was me. A ripple of recognition went through the room. Some of the students knew the story. The video had been shown in ethics classes, dissected as an example of what not to do. But hearing Daniel admit it, own it, made it different. I stood in my pristine office and I looked at a young man with Down syndrome who had delivered a package in the rain, and I treated him like he was worthless, like he was an inconvenience, like his existence was a problem I needed to solve. And in that moment I revealed who I really was. Not a healer, not a professional, just a scared, angry man who had spent his whole life running from his own humanity. But that young man, Michael Reyes, did something I never expected. He forgave me. Not because I deserved it, but because he understood something I had never learned, that every person has value, not because of what they achieve or how they look or what they can contribute, but simply because they are human. And that kindness, real kindness, means extending that recognition to everyone, even the people who hurt you. Michael saved my life twice. Once with his donated cells, which repaired my failing heart, and once with his forgiveness, which gave me a reason to want to keep living. Without him, I would have died, either physically or spiritually, and I would have deserved it. So when you graduate, when you go out into the world and start treating patients, I want you to remember something. Medicine is not about perfection. It is not about fixing people or making them into something they are not. It is about seeing them, truly seeing them, and offering them compassion and care without judgment. It is about recognizing that you are not above the people you treat. You are one of them, And the moment you forget that, you have lost the very thing that makes you a healer. The room was silent. Daniel could see some students nodding, others staring at him with expressions he could not quite read. But he pressed on, because this was the truth, and it needed to be said. I built a career on vanity, on telling people they were not good enough the way they were, and I made millions doing it. But I was the one who was not good enough. I was hollow, empty, isolated by my own arrogance, and if Michael had not shown me a different way, I would have stayed that way until I died, surrounded by beautiful things and utterly alone. Now I run a free clinic in East Los Angeles. I still perform surgeries, but not to make people beautiful by some arbitrary standard. I do it to relieve pain, to restore function, to help people feel comfortable in their own bodies. And I can tell you the work I do now means more than anything I ever did in Beverly Hills, because I am not just changing faces, I am changing lives, including my own. So my advice to you is this: do not wait until you destroy someone to learn empathy. Do not wait until you are broken to recognize your own humanity. Start now. Every day with every patient, choose to see the person in front of you as someone worthy of your best care, your full attention, your genuine respect. Not because they can pay you or because they matter to your career, but because they are human, and that is enough. Daniel paused, his throat tight with emotion. And if you ever find yourself looking at another person with contempt, with judgment, with the belief that you are somehow better than they are, I want you to remember Michael Reyes. Remember that the people you might dismiss could be the very people who save your life, and that the greatest privilege of being a doctor is not the power to change bodies. It is the opportunity to learn every single day how to be more human. He stepped back from the podium, and for a moment there was only silence. Then, slowly, one student began to clap, then another, and then the entire room was applauding, some students standing, their faces showing a mixture of respect and recognition. After the lecture, several students approached Daniel asking questions, sharing their own struggles with the pressure to succeed, the fear of failure, the difficulty of maintaining compassion in a system that often valued efficiency over humanity. Daniel listened to each one, giving them the time and attention he once would have dismissed as wasteful. One young woman, her eyes red-rimmed as though she had been crying, waited until everyone else had left. "Dr. Harlow," she said softly, "thank you for being honest. I have been thinking about quitting medical school because I do not know if I am strong enough to do this, but hearing you talk about making mistakes and learning from them, it made me think maybe I can try." Daniel looked at her, this young woman on the edge of giving up, and he saw himself. The boy who had been taught that weakness was unacceptable, that failure was shameful, that the only option was to be perfect or be nothing. "You are strong enough," he said gently. "Not because you will never make mistakes, but because you care enough to worry about making them. That is where compassion starts. With the willingness to be uncertain, to be vulnerable, to admit that you do not have all the answers. Medicine needs doctors who are brave enough to be human." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you." As Daniel left the building, stepping out into the bright Los Angeles sunshine, he felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel: hope, not just for himself, but for the future, for the young doctors who would carry forward the lesson he had learned too late, for the patients who would be treated with dignity and care, for a world that was slowly, imperfectly, learning to value kindness over perfection. That evening, Daniel drove to Michael's apartment. It had become a ritual, these weekly visits, a time when Daniel could step away from the demands of the clinic and simply be present with the person who had changed everything. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat together, watching television or working on puzzles or eating takeout from Michael's favorite Chinese restaurant. Tonight, when Daniel arrived, he found Michael and Elena in the middle of packing. Boxes were scattered around the living room, and Michael was carefully wrapping dishes in newspaper, his tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. "What is going on?" Daniel asked. Eleanor looked up, a smile on her face. "We are moving. I got a new job, better pay, and we found a bigger apartment. 2 bedrooms so Michael can have his own space for all his art supplies." "That is wonderful," Daniel said, genuinely happy for them, but there was a tightness in his chest. This apartment was where he had come to apologize, where Michael had forgiven him, where he had learned what it meant to be a friend. It felt like losing a piece of the journey. Michael must have seen something in his expression, because he set down the dish he was wrapping and came over. "You can still visit us," he said, The new place is only 20 minutes away, and you can help me set up my art room. I would like that, Daniel said. Good, Michael smiled. Because you are part of our family now. Families stick together. The words hit Daniel like a wave. Family. He had not had a real family in so long, had not even realized how much he missed it until this moment. His parents were gone. His marriage had ended in bitterness and recrimination. He had spent years believing that family was a weakness, a distraction from the work that mattered. But here in this small apartment with these two people who had every reason to turn him away, he had found something he had never expected. Belonging. Not because he had earned it or achieved it or bought it, but because they had chosen to let him in. Thank you, Daniel said, his voice breaking, for everything, for seeing something in me that I could not see in myself. Elena put down the box she was holding and came over, wrapping her arms around him in a fierce hug. You did the work, Daniel. We just reminded you that you could. Michael joined the hug, squeezing tight, and for a moment, the three of them stood there in the middle of the cluttered living room, holding onto each other like anchors in a storm. 6 months later, the Reyes Community Clinic was featured in a national news segment about innovative approaches to healthcare. The reporter interviewed patients who spoke tearfully about the care they had received, about feeling seen and valued for the first time in their lives. She interviewed Dr. Kim, who talked about the importance of treating medicine as a calling rather than a business. And she interviewed Michael, who explained with his characteristic sincerity how he had donated cells to help people and ended up helping the doctor who had once hurt him. I do not think about what happened before, Michael said, sitting in the clinic's waiting room surrounded by the mural he had helped paint. I think about what is happening now, and now Dr. Daniel is my friend, and he is helping a lot of people. That makes me really happy. The segment ended with footage of Daniel performing a surgery, his hands steady and sure, his face focused and calm. The narrator's voice played over the images, talking about redemption and second chances, and the power of forgiveness to transform lives. When the segment aired, Daniel watched it from Michael's new apartment, sitting on the couch between Michael and Eleanor. Michael cheered when he saw himself on screen, pointing excitedly at the television. That is me. I'm on TV. You are a star, Eleanor said, ruffling his hair. Daniel watched his own image on the screen, this version of himself who looked so different from the man he had been a year and a half ago. His face was the same, still flawless, still surgically perfect, but his eyes were different. They held something new, warmth, openness, peace. Do you think people will forgive you now? Michael asked, looking up at Daniel. Daniel considered the question. Some will not, and that is okay. Forgiveness is not something you can demand or expect. It is a gift, and I am grateful for the forgiveness I have received, especially yours. But even if no one else forgives me, I will keep doing this work, because it is the right thing to do. Michael nodded thoughtfully. That is good. You should do good things because they are good, not because you want people to like you. Exactly, Daniel said, smiling. When did you get so wise? I was always wise, Michael said with a grin. You just did not notice before. And Daniel laughed, a real laugh that came from somewhere deep and genuine because it was true. Michael had always been wise. Daniel had just been too blind to see it. 2 years after the video went viral, Daniel received a letter. It came in a plain white envelope, addressed to him at the clinic with no return address. He opened it during a rare, quiet moment, sitting in his small office, the sounds of the clinic humming softly beyond the door. The letter was handwritten, the script careful and precise. Dear Dr. Harlow, you do not know me, but I was one of the people who commented on the video of you and Michael. I wrote terrible things. I said you did not deserve to practice medicine, that you were a monster, that you should lose everything. I was so angry, so righteous in my judgment. But I have been following your work since then. I saw the news segment about the clinic. I read articles about the surgeries you perform for free. And I realized something. I was so quick to condemn you, to write you off as irredeemable, because it made me feel superior. It made me feel like I was on the right side, the good side, the side that would never make a mistake like yours. But the truth is, I have hurt people too. Maybe not in the same way, but I have been cruel and thoughtless and selfish. And if I had been recorded during my worst moments, if the world had seen me at my lowest, I would have been destroyed just like you were. I am writing this letter to apologize. Not because you need my apology, but because I need to give it. You have shown me that people can change, that mistakes do not have to be the end of the story. That redemption is possible if you are willing to do the work. I hope you continue what you are doing. The world needs more people who are brave enough to admit their failures and humble enough to learn from them. Sincerely, a stranger who learned from your example." Daniel read the letter 3 times, his eyes blurring with tears. He folded it carefully and placed it in his desk drawer, alongside Michael's drawings and the other small reminders of why he did this work. That evening, he shared the letter with Michael and Eleanor over dinner at their apartment. Eleanor's cooking filled the small space with warmth and the smell of homemade enchiladas. Michael listened intently as Daniel read the letter aloud, his expression serious. "That person was mean to you," Michael said when Daniel finished, "but they said sorry, that is good." "It is very good," Daniel agreed. "It reminded me that everyone is struggling with something, everyone makes mistakes, and the best thing we can do is try to understand each other instead of just judging." "I wish everyone thought like that," Elena said. "The world would be a lot kinder." "It starts with individuals," Daniel said. "One person choosing compassion, then another, then another. It is slow, but it is real." Michael reached across the table and took Daniel's hand. "You chose compassion, and now lots of people are learning from you. That is pretty cool." Daniel squeezed Michael's hand, overwhelmed by the simple truth of his words. Michael saw the world in such clear terms: good and bad, kindness and cruelty, right and wrong. There was no pretense, no manipulation, no hidden agenda, just a pure desire to help people feel good. "I am still learning from you every day," Daniel said. "I hope you know that." "I know," Michael said, smiling. "But that is what friends do. They learn from each other." 3 years after the video, on a sunny morning in May, Daniel stood in front of the Reyes Community Clinic and looked up at the building. It had grown. What had started as a single floor was now 3, with additional surgical suites, a dental clinic, a mental health center, and a community space where people could take classes, attend support groups, and simply be together. The funding had come from unexpected places: donations from people who had seen the news segment, grants from foundations that supported innovative healthcare models, and a significant contribution from a group of Daniel's former colleagues, doctors who had been inspired by his transformation and wanted to support the work. But more than the building itself, what mattered was what happened inside it every day. Hundreds of patients treated with dignity, dozens of medical students and residents rotating through, learning a different model of care, volunteers from the community coming in to help, to give back, to be part of something larger than themselves. Daniel had stepped back from performing surgeries every day. His heart was strong now, healthy and steady, but he was 55 years old, and he had learned that leadership meant knowing when to let others take the lead. He still operated once or twice a week, still saw patients for consultations, but most of his time was spent mentoring younger doctors, raising funds, and working on policy changes that could bring this model of care to other communities. Dr. Kim had become the clinic's chief of surgery, and she ran the operating rooms with a combination of skill and compassion that made Daniel proud every time he watched her work. Other doctors had joined the team, each bringing their own expertise and commitment to serving people who had been overlooked by the mainstream medical system. And through it all, Michael remained a constant presence. He had taken a part-time job at the clinic, working in the administrative office, helping with filing and organizing and greeting patients as they arrived. Everyone loved him. He remembered names, asked about people's families, made them feel welcome in a way that no training could teach. On this particular morning, Daniel was waiting because today was special. Today the clinic was dedicating a new wing, funded entirely by donations made in Michael's name. It would house a program for people with developmental disabilities, providing medical care, job training, and support services. And standing at the ribbon that would officially open the space was Michael himself, holding a pair of oversized scissors, his face glowing with pride. A crowd had gathered, patients and staff and community members and reporters. Daniel stood to the side, watching, his heart full. This was Michael's moment. Michael, who had been told his whole life that he was limited, that he needed to be protected, that he could not do as much as other people. But here he was, at the center of something transformative, his kindness and courage rippling outward in ways that would change countless lives. The clinic director, a woman named Dr. Patricia Alvarez, stepped up to the microphone. "We are here today to celebrate the opening of the Michael Reyes Center for Inclusive Care. This space exists because one young man believed that everyone deserves kindness, everyone deserves dignity, and everyone deserves the chance to contribute to their community. Michael Reyes embodies those values every single day, and we are honored to name this center after him. The crowd applauded and Michael waved, his smile so wide it seemed to light up the entire street. Elena stood beside him, tears streaming down her face, her hand on her brother's shoulder. Dr. Alvarez continued, "I also want to acknowledge Dr. Daniel Harlow, whose journey brought us to this moment. Daniel has shown us that transformation is possible, that people can learn and grow and become better versions of themselves. He has given his time, his resources, and his heart to this community, and we are grateful." More applause, and Daniel felt his face flush. He had never been comfortable with praise, but he was learning to accept it, to recognize that acknowledging growth was not the same as seeking glory. "Michael," Dr. Alvarez said, "would you like to say a few words before you cut the ribbon?" Michael stepped up to the microphone and the crowd quieted. He looked out at all the faces, and for a moment he seemed overwhelmed. Then he took a breath and began to speak. "Hi everyone, my name is Michael Reyes, and I am really happy to be here today. This building is named after me, which is really cool, but it is not just for me. It is for everyone who wants to help and everyone who needs help. My sister always told me that I can do anything I want if I try hard and if people give me a chance. And this place is about giving people chances. I know some people look at me and think I cannot do things because I have Down syndrome, but I can do a lot of things. I have a job, I have friends, I help people, and I am happy. I want everyone to feel like that. I want everyone to know that they matter and that they can do good things. Dr. Daniel taught me that everyone makes mistakes, even really big mistakes. But if you say sorry and you try to be better, that is what counts. He made a mistake with me, but he said sorry, and now he is one of my best friends, and he helps a lot of people every day. So I think that is pretty great." Michael paused, his eyes finding Daniel in the crowd. "Thank you, Daniel, for being my friend, and thank you to everyone who helped make this place. Now let us open it so people can start getting help." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Michael lifted the scissors, and with Eleanor's help, he cut the ribbon. It fell away, and people surged forward to see the new space, to explore the rooms that would soon be filled with hope and healing. Daniel stood back, watching it all unfold, and he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Dr. Kim smiling at him. "You did it," she said. "You actually did it." "We did it," Daniel corrected. "All of us, but especially Michael. He is the reason any of this exists." "True," Dr. Kim said, "but you are the reason he got the chance to show the world who he is. You could have hidden after that video. You could have moved to another city, changed your name, started over somewhere no one knew you, but you stayed. You faced it, and you let him change you. That took courage." Daniel shook his head. "It took desperation. I did not have anywhere else to go." "Maybe," Dr. Kim said, "but you chose the hard path instead of the easy one. That is still courage." Daniel watched Michael, who was now giving someone a tour of the new center, pointing out features with enthusiasm and pride. And Daniel thought about the man he had been 3 years ago, cold, isolated, convinced that control was the same as strength and that perfection was the same as worth. That man was gone, not erased, because Daniel would never forget him, would never forget the harm he had caused, but transformed, remade by humility and forgiveness and the steady, patient love of a young man who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. 5 years after the video went viral, Daniel Harlow sat in a coffee shop in East Los Angeles, a place he had come to love for its strong coffee and friendly staff, and the way the afternoon light filtered through the windows in golden shafts. He was working on a book, something he had never imagined himself doing. It was part memoir, part medical ethics text, part love letter to the community that had saved him. The working title was "What Michael Taught Me: Lessons in Humanity from the Unlikeliest Teacher." He was not sure if anyone would read it, but that was not really the point. The point was to document the journey, to create a record of what he had learned, so that maybe someone else, someone struggling the way he had struggled, might find a path forward. He was deep in a chapter about the nature of forgiveness when the bell above the door chimed and Michael walked in. He spotted Daniel immediately and waved, then headed to the counter to order his usual, a hot chocolate with extra whipped cream. A few minutes later, Michael slid into the chair across from Daniel, his cup steaming, his face bright with his characteristic enthusiasm. "Hi, Daniel. I did not know you would be here today. I needed a change of scenery," Daniel said, closing his laptop. "How are you? How was work?" "Good," Michael said. "We had a lot of patients today. One of them brought me cookies because I remembered her daughter's name. I shared them with everyone in the office. That was kind of you, Daniel said. Cookies are better when you share them, Michael said, as though this was an obvious truth that everyone should know. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their drinks and watching the people pass by on the street outside. It was these moments that Daniel treasured most. Not the big events, not the awards or the recognition or the success of the clinic, but the simple act of sitting with a friend, present and grateful, and at peace. "Can I ask you something?" Michael said after a while. "Always. Do you ever think about that day, when I delivered the package and you were mean to me?" Daniel's chest tightened. "Yes, I think about it a lot. Does it still make you sad?" "Sometimes," Daniel admitted. "Not because I am stuck in the past, but because I wish I could go back and do it differently. I wish I could have been the person I am now, so I never hurt you in the first place." Michael thought about this, his brow furrowed in concentration. "But if you did not hurt me, would you have changed?" It was such a simple question, and it cut right to the heart of everything Daniel had been grappling with for years. The uncomfortable truth that sometimes growth came from failure, that sometimes the most important lessons were learned in the moments of greatest shame. "I do not know," Daniel said honestly. "Maybe I would have found another way to learn. Or maybe I would have kept going the way I was, hurting people and not even realizing it, until something even worse happened." "I think you would have changed eventually," Michael said, "because you are a good person. You were just lost for a while, but good people find their way back." Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. "You have more faith in me than I have in myself." "That is what friends are for," Michael said. "They believe in you even when you do not believe in yourself." They finished their drinks and walked back to the clinic together, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the pavement. As they reached the entrance, Michael stopped and looked up at the building, his expression thoughtful. "Do you know what I think?" he said. "What?" "I think this is the most beautiful building in the whole city." Daniel looked at the structure. It was not glamorous. The paint was not pristine. The architecture was functional, not innovative. But it was filled with life, with purpose, with people who cared about each other. And maybe that was the truest form of beauty. "I think you are right," Daniel said. Years continued to pass, each one adding layers to the story that had begun with a moment of cruelty and transformed into a testament to the power of redemption. Daniel grew older, his hair silvering, his face showing the lines that came not from worry, but from laughter and compassion. The clinic thrived, expanding to serve more people, training more doctors, becoming a model that other communities sought to replicate. Michael continued to work, to volunteer, to spread his particular brand of joy wherever he went. He never married, never moved far from his sister, never sought fame or recognition. He simply lived, fully and authentically, proving every single day that a life measured not by achievement, but by kindness, was a life well lived. And Daniel, who had once believed that perfection was the highest goal, learned that the greatest achievement was simply to love without condition, to see people as they truly were, and to show up, day after day, with humility and grace. On his 60th birthday, Daniel sat in the community room of the clinic, surrounded by the people who had become his family. Patients he had treated, doctors he had mentored, staff members who had believed in the vision even when it seemed impossible. And at the center of it all, Michael and Elena, smiling and singing off-key as a cake with too many candles was carried into the room. "Make a wish," Elena said, laughing as Daniel leaned forward to blow out the candles. Daniel closed his eyes. Once, he would have wished for success, for recognition, for the validation that came from being the best. But now, his wish was simpler and infinitely more meaningful. He wished for more time, time to keep learning, time to keep serving, time to sit with Michael and drink coffee and talk about nothing and everything, time to be grateful for the second chance he had been given, not by luck or by his own efforts, but by the grace of a young man who had looked at someone who hurt him and chosen love instead of bitterness. He blew out the candles and the room erupted in applause. Michael threw his arms around Daniel in a hug that nearly knocked him over, and Daniel hugged back, holding tight to this person who had saved his life in every way that mattered. "Happy birthday, Daniel," Michael said. "I am really glad you are my friend." "I am glad too," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "More glad than you will ever know." And in that moment, surrounded by love and laughter and the messy, imperfect beauty of real life, Daniel Harlow understood the truth that had eluded him for so long. Perfection was not the goal. Connection was. Compassion was. Showing up, broken and uncertain and willing to learn was. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough, it was everything. In a world obsessed with success and perfection, Daniel Harlow learned that the greatest achievement is not to be flawless, but to be human. He learned that value is not earned through accomplishment, but inherent in existence. He learned that the people we dismiss might be the very people who save us. And most importantly, he learned that it is never too late to change, never too late to choose kindness, never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. Michael Reyes, in his simple wisdom and boundless compassion, taught a brilliant surgeon what no medical school ever could, that the heart, above all else, is meant to feel, to connect, and to love. And that lesson, more than any surgery, more than any cure, is what truly heals.